In the heart of the 3rd century crisis, a storm was brewing. The Roman Empire, vast and powerful, was teetering on the brink of collapse. Barbarian invasions, civil wars, and economic chaos had bled it dry. The people were desperate, their faith in the old gods wavering. It was a time for a savior, or so they thought. Instead, they got Decius. Born in the rugged lands of Pannonia, Gaius Messius Quintus Traianus Decius was a man forged in the crucible of military life. He was a traditionalist, a senator who yearned for the glory days of the Republic, a time when Roman virtus, was the bedrock of the state. He saw the chaos around him, not just as a political failure, but as a spiritual one. The gods were angry, and Rome was paying the price. In 249 AD, the reigning emperor, Philip the Arab, sent Decius to command the legions on the Danube frontier. It was a critical post, a bulwark against the marauding Goths who relentlessly hammered at the empire's borders. Decius was a capable commander. He restored discipline, bolstered the defenses, and won the loyalty of his troops. Perhaps too much loyalty. His soldiers, impressed by his leadership and weary of Philip's rule, proclaimed Decius emperor against his will. Decius was now a rebel. He had a choice: stand down and face certain death, or march on Rome and claim the throne. For a man who prized Roman tradition, this was a moment of profound conflict. But the die was cast. He led his legions into Italy. Near Verona, his battle-hardened troops clashed with Philip's forces. The battle was swift and brutal. Philip the Arab was slain, and Decius, the reluctant usurper, became the master of the Roman world. His first act as emperor was a declaration of war, not against a foreign enemy, but against the enemies within. He believed Rome's salvation lay in a return to the old ways, a grand restoration of traditional Roman piety. To appease the angry gods, he issued an edict that would echo through history. Every single inhabitant of the empire, man, woman, and child, was commanded to perform a public sacrifice to the Roman gods. Not for Jupiter, not for Mars, but for the genius of the emperor himself. It was a loyalty test on an unprecedented scale. Those who complied received a certificate, a libellus, proving their devotion. It was a piece of paper that meant the difference between life and death. But what about those who refused? For the growing Christian community, this was an impossible demand. To sacrifice to the emperor was to deny their one true God, an act of apostasy. The Decian persecution had begun. Unlike later, more systematic persecutions, Decius's edict wasn't initially aimed at creating martyrs. The goal was conversion, not extermination. He wanted Christians to renounce their faith, to rejoin the Roman fold. But the Christians refused. They stood firm. Priests, bishops, and ordinary believers were arrested. They were tortured, not necessarily to kill them, but to break their will. Famous figures like Pope Fabian in Rome and Bishop Babylas of Antioch were martyred, becoming symbols of defiance. Across the empire, communities were torn apart. Some Christians buckled under the pressure, performing the sacrifice to save their lives. They became known as the Lapsi, the fallen, creating a deep schism within the church that would last for decades. Others fled into the deserts and mountains, choosing exile over betrayal. The catacombs of Rome swelled with those hiding from the authorities. While Decius waged his war on faith, the empire's external borders were still under siege. The Goths, led by their formidable king, Cniva, saw the internal turmoil as an opportunity. They surged across the Danube once more, not just for plunder, but for conquest. They laid siege to major cities, overwhelming the Roman defenses. Decius, the seasoned general, had to abandon his religious project and race back to the frontier. He was an emperor fighting a war on two fronts, one for the soul of Rome and one for its very survival. In 251 AD, Decius and his son, Herennius Etruscus, who he had elevated to co-emperor, cornered the Gothic army under Cniva, near a small town in Moesia called Abritus. Decius was confident. He had the superior force, the terrain seemed favorable, and he was determined to crush the barbarian threat once and for all. The battle began well for the Romans. Their initial charge scattered the Gothic front lines, Herennius Etruscus fighting bravely at the head of his men. was struck down by an enemy arrow early in the fight. Upon seeing his son fall, Decius reportedly rallied his men with a cry that would become legendary. "Let no one mourn. The death of one soldier is not a great loss to the Republic." He was all in. This was for Rome. He pressed the attack, driving the Goths back. But King Conniva was a cunning tactician. He had laid a trap. He lured the Roman legions into a treacherous swamp, a marshy ground where their heavy armor and disciplined formations became a fatal liability. The Romans became bogged down in the mud, unable to maneuver. The Goths, lighter and more familiar with the terrain, surrounded them. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. The legionaries were sitting ducks, picked off by a hail of arrows and javelins. In the chaos and the mire, Emperor Decius, the man who wanted to restore the glory of Rome, was swallowed by the swamp. His body was never found. For the first time in its long history, a Roman emperor had been killed in battle against a foreign enemy. It was a catastrophic blow to Roman prestige. The man who sought to appease the gods had been utterly forsaken by them on the battlefield. His reign, lasting barely 2 years, ended in total disaster. The persecution ended with his death, but the chaos he left in his wake only deepened the 3rd century crisis. Decius's story is a tragic paradox. He was a man of principle, a traditionalist who genuinely believed he was saving the Roman Empire. Yet his actions only accelerated its decline. His attempt to unify the empire through forced religious conformity backfired spectacularly, strengthening the very community he sought to break. His military ambition led him to a swampy, anonymous grave. He wanted to be a new Trajan, a restorer of Roman greatness. Instead, he became a grim footnote, a cautionary tale of how rigid ideology and brutal force can lead an empire, and a man to ruin. He was the emperor who declared war on a faith and was consumed by a war he could not win. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into Roman history as fascinating as I did, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories from the ancient world. Let me know in the comments which historical figure you'd like to see covered next. Until next time, stay curious.